South Africa's new multi-year national budget has come under intense scrutiny of economists, corporate executives, and other analysts. Basically, the new budget presented to the Parliament on Wednesday by Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana has come at a time that's pretty much crunch time for Africa's most advanced economy, weighed down by years of underinvestments, high unemployment, weak public sector, and a barrage of geopolitical tariff fights and other headwinds. Let's take a listen to some of what the analysts' viewpoints are as canvassed by the Rand Merchant Bank Budget Review Forum held this week.
Spending increases, the gross increases before they draw down on reserves and so forth. Originally in the budget 1.0 that was 108 billion. Just this financial year, they revised it down to 102 billion. So that shows you what small adjustments they actually made from a spending perspective between budget 1.0 and budget 2.0.
And highlight that because that's an issue of contention, right? When it comes to spending, expenditure has been the frustration that we've actually been expressing for quite some time.
Absolutely. So if you're spending, then you draw down on your contingency reserves and all of that, and that's what leaves you circa the 60 billion that has to be found from tax increases. And that's really the question, right? Is if you start there and you take it down to 60 billion, you need to do something. You need to either raise VAT or you need to raise personal income tax. But because you're starting with this big expenditure increase, your only options then are either to obviously increase borrowing or to increase taxes. One of our Generation Z people at work said, this budget is not budgeting. And I think she was completely right. This budget isn't budgeting. You know, when you or I are faced with less revenue, or we look at our income over the next year and then we make a decision how much we're going to spend, what car are we going to buy, what house are we going to buy, what clothes are we going to buy, we cut our spending to suit what we're getting in.
Yeah.
And it doesn't seem as though that's really been what. So that's, I guess, the disappointment, is that the answer to all the questions is an increase in taxes. And then we all know what we really need to do is increase economic growth. And the Minister was very good at summarizing, I think, the excellent progress of Operation Vulindlela 1.0, really good summary of some very good things that have happened. But I think, as Honourable Zibi said this morning in the address, you know, we're not seeing the progress on the Transnet rail reforms. We're not really seeing progress on the ports reforms yet. There's been some talk about it, but we haven't quite seen it yet. And we were hoping for some tangible results on that. And
there are two perspectives. So the first one is to look at the fiscal framework, at least from a borrowing perspective, that was maintained. So whatever the difference is between the political players, they seem to have understood that we need to keep our borrowing where they are, at least where they have been projected to be at the MTBPS and also at the budget 1.0, which wasn't tabled. So that's a good outcome from a market's perspective. No new borrowings, because you can't simply sustain the level of debt servicing costs given the economy that is not growing where it should be. Which then brings me to a different perspective, which is the actions that are required for us to lift economic growth. That, for me, I think is a bit of a disappointment. Mm-hmm. We didn't get a bold enough action plan, perhaps by design. National Treasury isn't responsible for what happens in the sectors where growth should come from. Their job is to budget, but that budget must then produce the actions in the different sectors. To Mr. Zivi's point earlier on, what needs to happen in logistics, in energy, and all the other sectors. And that is not within the mandate of the Treasury. Mm-hmm. So in the frustrations that we have because of lack of growth, we tend to point all those frustrations to the person that delivers the budget. But so little frustrations are pointed at the leaders that are actually supposed to make the change in the sectors where growth is going to come from. So maybe I would say we are disappointed by design because the budget is tabled by the finance minister and we don't see other ministers in the same way.
I want to first quickly start by commenting, giving input about the budget as well, and then I'll come into the details. I think the way we look at the budget as a budget office is really from the perspective of what it's meant to do And I think for us it's important when you start from the SONA, State of Nation Address, is set out clear priorities in terms of where we want to be as a country, or at least MTDP, which has not yet been put out there. And we use that as a lens from which we look at the budget, and we feel that's how, at least from the legislative perspective, we should look at the budget, because that's what Honorable Zibi, when they get appointed or voted in, people want to see those things being improved in society. And I think that's the biggest important dynamic in our view, that at a lot of times we find that we look at the budget from the rents and cents and balance and all of that. It's not useful in a more outcome-based thinking, which Parliament should be. And I think when we look at it from that perspective, you see that the budget did try to address some of the commitments in the SONA at least, but it was a really difficult balancing act to do, particularly when you think about the cost of living, dealing with inequality. Some of the proposals are like to fly through the proposed targets or the priorities that are set out in that perspective. And I think that's what we will be presenting next week, Tuesday, to say, how is this budget really? Because it allows us to understand what are different stakeholders' role, particularly investors, what role they can play into the space. One of the exciting things I picked up is the issue of infrastructure development. It's a very big space, which, in my view, it crowds in private investors. It's supposed to be. And I think more detailed around that. Of course, it's below the 10% NDP target, 5%, I think 5% over the medium term, but it's something that we have not seen over time. But also, investment, human capital, social protection is a very important aspect of it. And I think those are dynamics from my perspective. Yes, we are all concerned about the way the tax will really suppress demand.